Hey everyone, and especially those who were not able to join us in our stamp club today. And I know that we are all kind of basketballed out. I'm giving away my school colors by the shirt that I have on, but I'm not going to bias anybody except that I'm super anxious about the game that will be starting in a little bit less than an hour. We'll see. Anyway, today we are going to be making what I'm calling a double twist fun fold card. I have no clue if that's the right title or not, but I guess it really doesn't matter. And we're just going to jump in. It's the best way to do this card, and we're going to cut together. So I am going to flip my camera over. And yep, you're staring at an envelope. But let's open the envelope. This is just a generic A2 size envelope. And when I open it up, you're going to see this cute little double twist fun fold card. And when I open it, I've got a really fun inside, and the outside has a twist. What's also nice is it will stand. And I know that's hard to see when you're looking at it on camera, but when you stand it, it stands like this. So it stands up and it just has this really cool kind of twist. So that's the way it stands. And I am going to literally jump in and show you how to make this. It's pretty darn quick. And I also want to highlight the products that I've used in this particular example, because I'm going to use the same products in the one that I make now. So I'm focusing on the very, very pretty Simply Elegant suite. I'm not going to use the entire suite. I am going to use elements from the stamp set, which is called Elegantly Said. Gorgeous, gorgeous stamps. I am definitely going to be using some of the paper, and you see some of the designer series paper on here's the full collection, but you can see two of the pieces here. There are a lot of foils that are involved in that collection, and the paper is just stunning. It is absolutely, absolutely gorgeous. And then I'm also going to use the punch, and I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for this punch and for maybe some of the punches that you have in your stash that you may not really use the punch to the full extent that you can. And we're going to make sure that you look at your punches a little bit differently. I am starting with a piece of pale papaya. And the first thing that I am going to do is I'm going to cut my card base. And these are the instructions. So for the card base, I'm going to cut this piece to 4 1/4 by 7 1/2. So 4 1/4 by 7 1/2. The best way that I know to do that is to take a standard piece of cardstock, which starts at 8 1/2 by 11, and I'm going to cut that on the 8 1/2 side at 4 1/4. That's going to give me the first dimension of the card base. And actually, you're going to get 2 of these cards out of 1 piece of cardstock. So now I have 2 pieces. Each of these is 4 1/4 by 11. I want it to be 4 1/4 by 7 1/2. So I've got an option here. I can extend the arm and I can get it to my 7 1/2 inch line, or I can be lazy and I can put this at the 2 1/2 inch mark, take 2 1/2 inches off the 11, and that is going to get me to 7 1/2. So I'm doing my math again. So nope, it's 3 1/2. 3 1/2 will get me, yeah, I'm taking it at 3 1/2. Good thing I did that again. So 3 1/2 inches I'm going to cut off, and that's going to get me to 7 1/2 inches in total. And I can just triple check that, and I can see that 7 1/2 inches long. So I am at my first step. And again, I'm just going to bring these directions out. I've got my cardstock at 4 1/4 by 7 1/2. And now I'm going to make 2 score lines on the 7 1/2 inch side. One is going to be at 2 1/2 and one is going to be at 5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my scoring board. And for those of you who love math, and you may want to do these in different dimensions, and you can, the trick is that whatever the length is of your card, you're going to score it in thirds. So we're at 7 1/2, and we're going to do 2 1/2 and 5, and that's going to get it so we have the paper scored in thirds. So I'm going to go ahead and score at 2 1/2. And then what I like to do is I like to, rather than go to that 5 inch line, and you can definitely do that. You don't need to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to flip this around and I'm just going to score it again at 2 1/2. And I find sometimes when I do it this way, that the scores line up a little bit better. Essentially, it's getting me at 5 and at 2 1/2. I just did it in a different way. Okay, so we've got the beginning of our base, and let's kind of look at where we are. It's easier to look at the back. So we've done these 2 score lines, the ones where my thumbs are. What we need to do now is we need to do our diagonal score lines. And let's look at where those diagonal score lines are. I kind of put this back into my scoring board. I don't want to completely crush this. You can see that one of those score lines goes from the 7 1/2 inch up at the top down to the 5 inch score line at the bottom. And then if I flip this over, I'm going to do another score line exactly the same. The reason I wanted to show you that is I wanted to make sure that my directions make sense. So my next direction is to make diagonal score lines from the top 7 1/2 to the bottom of the 5 inch corners. And this is going to make sense when we do it. And essentially what that means is we're going to score from the top corner. This is our 7 1/2 inch mark. And we're going to score a diagonal line down to the corner down here at that 5 inch mark. Now, I saw someone on YouTube who I thought had a brilliant way to do this. So bear with me, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my paper, I'm going to turn it on a diagonal, and just for sake of argument, I'm putting that at my 7 inch line, and I'm just making sure that I can move my paper around, and I can. It is really hard to see where that 7 inch line is coming down here. I can't visualize it. I could take a pencil or I could take a pen and I could draw a line and that would work. But here's a really cool trick. I'm going to take my stylus and I'm putting that at my 7 inch mark. And I'm just going to bring that down and I'm going to hold that stylus in that little groove. I'm just going to keep it right there. I'm going to bring my paper back up and I'm putting that corner in that 7 inch groove. And I'm going to line up where I want the score line to be with my stylus because I know that that stylus is marking that 7 inch line. So because I've got everything lined up, I'm good. I know that when I score, that I'm going to come right down to that corner. And it's a perfect way to do that. So what I've done here, let's just kind of regroup, is I've done my diagonal line from the top right to the bottom of that 5 inch score line. And again, I just took my stylus, I put it in the 7 inch, I could put it in the 8 inch, wherever I want, just so I have enough room to move the paper around. Put it in my 7 inch score line or little groove, brought that down, put the top corner in And then I brought my stylus up so I could figure out where I needed that paper to be. And then I scored. We're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to simply flip our paper over. And you're going to see now that the score line that we just did visually is going from the 2.5 inch score down to the bottom left. We're going to mimic that. We're going to do one more. We're going to put one more starting here at the 7.5, and it's going to come down to where our 5-inch score line is. And I'm going to do the exact same thing that I just did. So I'm taking my stylus, I've got it in that 7-inch groove. I'm just pulling it down. I'm holding it right there. And then with my left hand, I'm going to bring that stylus close and see how I can move that piece of paper around and get that corner right where I want it to be. I want my score line to end right there. So I'm just going to start up at the top and I'm going to bring it down. And that's just a super cool way, I think, to be able to do the diagonals. This is our card base. You are done with all the scoring that you need to do. And when we put the burnish in our scores that we just did, you're going to have a card base that will stand up. So let's do that. I'm going to go ahead and take the cardstock out. I am going to grab my bone folder and we're going to go ahead and we're going to burnish. And we're going to start with the 2 vertical score lines that we did. I always fold into the bump. I always have the bump on the inside of my folds. I find that the fibers of the paper work better. So I am folding that in and I'm getting that a really, really good burnish. I am then going to do the exact same thing on the other side. And again, the bump in the score is facing up. And I'm just going to fold that over and I'm going to give that a really nice burnish. Now, the other scores, what we're going to do, and these are going to go against that little bump, but that's okay. I'm holding it, so you can see I've got the 2 flaps on the outside folded up. They're folding toward me. And I'm going to take one of those and I'm going to push it down. And then the score lines, the diagonal, I'm going to pull them up. So I am literally pulling that up. And I am going to fold that over. And I'm going to burnish that really well. And then the other side, I'm going to fold that over. And I'm going to pull the diagonal back. And I am going to burnish that really well. And if you have a gap in the middle, don't worry about it. It is actually going to add to the card. And you've got your card base. That's how easy it is to make this card base. The base is all set. You can test it. You can just prop it up and it is going to stand. So that is our card base. And let's just, again, take a peek at what we just did. We started with a 4 1/4 by 7.5. We scored it at 2.5 and 5 on the 7.5 inch side. So these were those score lines. Then we made our diagonal scores and we burnished everything. So we have our card base. Now we are going to cut some paper and some designer series paper actually to do some of the decorating. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring back in the example and we're going to look at where those pieces are. And then we're going to talk about what sizes of paper we need to cut. So you can see that on the front on these 2 pieces, so these 2 flaps on the front, I have one kind of designer series paper and I chose the foils. And then underneath each of those, I chose another of the designer series paper from the collection, and I thought they worked together well. One thing to keep in mind, and I will show you this, is if you have a pattern on your paper, you might want to think about how you want to orient it. And I thought the flowers, kind of ignore the sentiment for a minute, I thought the flowers vertically looked like they went up in that orientation. But let's grab our paper. And what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cut 2 pieces. And those pieces are going to be the exact same size. They're going to be 2 3/8 in width and 4 1/8 in height. So this piece and this piece are the exact same size. And I'm going to replicate them. I'm going to bring in the gorgeous paper that I use. This is part of the collection in the Simply Elegant suite. And in my mind, the flowers, I think, kind of look like they go, not all the time. I'm going to make this my vertical. As I look at it, now I'm going to make this my vertical. And I am going to cut this so that I have 4 1/8 by 2 3/8. Actually, I like it better that way. So 2 3/8. So 2 3/8 is just a little bit after the 2 1/4. It's going to be between 2 1/4 and 2 1/2. So I'm going to cut this at 2 3/8. And it looks really skinny, and you're probably thinking, wow, that doesn't look like a lot of paper. But it doesn't take a lot of paper to make this work. So 2 3/8, and then I'm going to make this 4 1/8. And 4 1/8 is between 4 and 4 1/4. I'm just going to cut that at 4 1/8. And let me bring over what we are making, and you can see that that is going to fit without a problem on the front. While I've got the paper cutter out, I'm going to go ahead and get my other piece. And this is another piece from the same designer series paper collection. It is, again, just stunning. I thought that this side, which is a little bit matte as far as color, would be kind of a nice contrast. So again, we're going to go to 2 3/8, right between 2 1/4 and 2 1/2. So 2 3/8 and 4 1/8. And that's between 4 and 4 1/4. Between 4 and 4 1/4. And we're going to have 2 pieces that are the exact same size. Now, let's just chat about these for just a minute. And I'm going to get the instructions out. And I will make sure that these are included in anything that I post. So we've cut our 2 pieces, the exact same size. And what we need to end up with on these is we need to end up with 2 triangles out of each piece. So on the flower piece, I'm going to cut from the upper left corner to the lower right corner, because when I have the card like this, that piece is going to be on the front, and I want it to look like it's straight in this orientation. So I'm going to cut this one from the left corner to the right corner. I'm going to do that first. And when I do this, I eyeball it. I put it into my paper cutter, and I'm doing the left top to the bottom right. And I'm just looking at that point. I'm getting the point right in the middle of the little line where the blade is going to go. Now, one thing, this is important. When you are cutting paper like this and you're cutting on a point, don't pull your blade toward the point, you will potentially smush the point. So start your cut in the middle. So put your blade over the top, press it down, and it doesn't matter if you cut down or cut up first. I'm going to cut up, and then I have the ability to cut back down. The reason I can do that is the point has been cut, meaning when I put the blade in and I cut, I was cutting the paper and I was cutting through the point. I can now bring that blade back because the point is cut and that blade is going to go right through the end, and it's going to give you a really nice cut, and the point is not squished. So just a tip on how to use that cutting blade. So let's pause again. Let's just think this through before we make the cut. So I've done the first one. I've cut my paper, and that's why I wanted it to be oriented. I'm going to put that to the side. Now I'm going to grab the other piece. For me, I don't care about the pattern on this. I'm not looking at what's right or wrong as far as being up or down. And I'm going to be making a cut. Let's just look at how the paper is on here. I'm actually going to cut this one. And honestly, it really doesn't matter, but I'm going to cut from the upper right to the bottom left. I'm going to just mimic what I've done over here. So I'm just looking at the way that these pieces are going to go on this card. And because I know that I'll put this piece on the bottom layer, I'm going to cut from the upper right corner to the lower left corner. And again, I'm going to bring my paper trimmer back in, do the same thing, and I'm going to pause, and I'm going to say, okay, let me think. I want to start with the upper to the lower, upper right to the lower left. I'm going to put my little points right in that groove where the blade is going to go. And I'm going to put my gate down. Actually, I need to have my blade over the paper. Now we'll put the gate down, push that blade, and this time I'll go straight down. I'm going to cut it down, and I went through that point. So now I can come back through because that point is cut, and I'm going to have a really nice cut where those points are not getting smushed. Okay, so I have my pieces of paper cut. Now what I want to do is I want to attach these to the card. And what I like to do on this is I am going to attach these pieces so that the long side of the triangle is flush up against the piece of cardstock. You can see that there's a little bit of a trim of the cardstock color on the left and on the bottom, but there's no cardstock showing on the right on this piece. So I've got it right up against where that score line is. I think it just gives a cleaner look. It looks like the two pieces of paper are coming together a little bit better. I'm going to bring this back in, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this a really good burnish because I want to make sure that before I attach that paper, that it is just going to sit on the edge as well as I can make it. And I'm going to look at my paper, and I'm just going to make sure that I have the pieces oriented the right way. And I'm going to go ahead and attach them. And I'm going to use Tombow on this. I just find that it's a little bit easier to do. And like usual, I'm not going to go all the way to the edge when I put the adhesive on, but I do want to make sure that at least there's adhesive that's going to be going around on all the different sides. All right. So this little guy is going to go on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of lay that top edge, the way I'm looking at it as a top edge on first. And then I'm just going to move my piece around, and I can see that it is flush up against that score line, and it's got a really nice little frame around the side. And I am just going to make sure that it is nice and varnished. I'm going to varnish that with my finger. On the other piece, do the same thing. And you can start with either set of triangles, whatever makes you happy. I don't know why, but I went to the outside ones first. I think it gives a little bit more instant gratification in terms of seeing the design. I'm going to turn that around. And just like I did on the other one, I'm going to hold that corner and get it right up against the edge as best as I can. And then move that paper around a little bit. Try to get it flush with the corner. And then I've got a really nice edge on the two sides. And when I bring that together, you can see that I think without another border on either side, it looks a little bit more finished. It looks a little bit more elegant. The second pieces of paper, we're going to tuck up underneath, and we're going to put on the bottom of the cards here. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. These don't need to be as precise because you're not necessarily going to see all the sides, because you're going to be concentrating more on the front of the card. But you do want to do the best job that you can to get these attached. And I'm going to hold this front open and try to get that long side as close to my score line as I can. But I'm also going to test that that flap can fold over before I really commit to putting that piece down. Because sometimes if I get it a little too close and I fold this over, I might push the paper out a little bit. But that's looking pretty good. And then I'll take my other piece and do the same thing. And obviously, the sky's the limit on the designs that you can do. You don't even really need to put paper on the underside where I'm putting it now. I think you can get away without putting some designer series paper. I just thought that the contrast looks kind of fun. So again, I'm pushing that paper in as close to that score line as I can. And then I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that that's going to fold over without a problem. And give that a good push. So now you can see when that card is open, we have two complementary designer series papers that are showing. So what do we have left? There are a couple of things that we still need to do to kind of mimic this card. And I'm actually going to do the inside first. And let's talk about that inside piece. The inside is a piece of white. It is basic white. I'll pull the instructions back in here. For the inside piece, and you can do whatever you want with this. You could leave it plain. You could put sentiments. You can do, other images like I've done. It's the exact same size as our designer series paper was. Obviously, we're not going to be cutting it into two triangles, but that piece is going to be a piece that is 2 3/8 by 4 1/2. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that out as well. So 2 3/8 by 4 1/2. And it's just a nice little piece to put in the middle. So 2 3/8 by 4, not 4 1/2, 4 1/4, 4 1/8, excuse me. 2 3/8 by 4 1/8. Having a problem with math today. And again, it's not magic, it's math that all three pieces that we cut, the two designer series paper pieces and the one cardstock that goes in the middle, they're all the same size. Because when we started this, we scored our piece into 3 equal parts. So that means that we're going to have the same size on all 3 panels. Before I attach this in the middle, I am going to do a little bit of stamping. And I decided to use a couple of the stamps from the Elegantly Said set. I wanted to make this into a thank you card. And you can see that I added a sentiment. All the things we do are simply amazing. And then also I played on the flowers that are in the paper and brought that in. Now, I cheated because I have set up my stamp apparatus to forgive me and forgive all this crazy paper in the background. I tend to use things multiple times before I get rid of it. And I have my flower, which I just think that is so, so pretty. And it definitely mimics the flower that is in the designer series paper. And I also wanted to mimic as best as I could the coppery tone of the paper. And I thought that cinnamon cider worked the best. So I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to ink up my flower here. And this is one of the colors that is going to be retiring when the new catalog comes out. So if you love it, you may want to grab some of the ink, the refills, the paper, and any of the embellishments that are in that color, because fairly soon they are likely going to be unavailable. And then the other thing that I added was all the things we do are simply amazing. I'm going to do that in Memento black ink. And I have that set up so that it's going to go at the top of my little piece. I thought the black was really elegant and also, again, complemented the designer series paper really well. And I don't know about you, but I don't know where I would be without the stamp apparatus. I use it a lot, an awful lot. And I'll leave everything set up because I'm probably going to make a few more of these before I put everything away. So now I can go ahead and put my sentiment on the inside. And, you know, as I mentioned before, you can leave this perfectly blank. It would be a great thing to have as a place to put a message. You could make it all designer series paper. You could put another piece of designer series paper on the inside and have your sentiment on the outside. Maybe have a piece of basic white on the back of your card for an area where you would sign it and put anything, you know, any kind of note that you wanted on it. So just a little bit of tombow here. And then I'll go ahead and put this in the middle. And I'm just going to try to get this as centered as I can and not think about myself. So there we've got the makings of the bones of the card. And as I mentioned, it will stand up. So let's talk about how you can finish these off. And when I say these, I mean this kind of card design. You can do a sentiment like I've done here. I'm going to make this fairly simple. I could have also put a magnet on the card underneath this designer series paper and put a magnet on the back of the sentiment and would held this together a little bit. Honestly, you don't even really need to put a sentiment on here if you don't want to. You can add bling on the outside and this would stand on its own. It would be a gorgeous card. But I did want to use the amazing punch that comes with this set. And I cheated. I did do this ahead of time. I did stamp a piece of the pale papaya, and I used one of the stamps from the Elegantly Said stamp set, the one that says thank you. I did that in black Mendoza ink, and I went ahead and punched that out. But before I put everything together, I wanted to show you a couple of things that you may or may not know about punches. And I'm not trying to insult your intelligence or anything like that. But I wanted to let you know that there are some ways that you can use punches like these that are not just going to give you a shape that looks like this. You can use this punch to create something that looks like this, believe it or not. And if you don't know this trick, I really hope this will open your eyes and you'll look at punches that you have that obviously may not be this design, but will help you make things that will look like this. So when you look at the difference here, this design, the one that I've stamped, thank you, is the exact punch, right? If you stamp, then you punch. And when you're punching, always look at the back. That's going to help you see where your sentiment is and lining things up. Don't do it from the front. You will not be successful. And what I also recommend is whatever hand you use to write, hold the punch in that hand. That's probably the one that you're stronger and you're going to have a better outcome. But let's talk about how to do something like this. Well, the way I did that is I measured how wide this punch is, where that opening is. So in other words, how wide it is between my fingers. Got my ruler out, and it's about 1 3/4 inches. Okay, so I cut a piece of paper that's 1 3/4 inches. And what I did is I took that paper and I put it into the punch. And then I pulled the paper out of the punch, right up through that opening. And the reason I can do that is my paper is just a teeny bit skinnier than the width of the punch. So I can pull that paper up. I'm going to punch. This is kind of cool too. I've got the end. That would make a really cool little decoration. And now I have part of the punch. I was able to get it in so I can punch an end, but not get the shape. Well, let's see. Why don't I put this in again? And I pull it through. And I'm just making sure that I can see paper all the way up to the end of where I'm going to punch this out. And I'm going to punch it in. And now I have this super cool design that I can use, and it's a different because I can cut my paper to whatever length I want. So I could put a sentiment in here, maybe put it in my Stamparatus and get everything nice and even. If I wanted to use this as the front, that's kind of cool. I could put that on the front. So don't be limited when you look at the shape of a punch. You can do things with it. Don't be limited on the way that you can punch things out. Look at the shape and kind of consider it. And think about this too. When you look at this punch, yeah, it's that shape. But what if I wanted to just punch an edge? Let me take this in here. I'm going to line up the top and the bottom in the corners and punch that out. I've got a really cool shape right here. I could do the same thing on the other side of this piece of paper. And it may not be exactly at the same height, but we'll pretend. I'm just going to line up the edges. And if you squeeze the punch, it won't cut out the shape, but it will hold the paper. So again, I've got the top and the bottom. And I've got this really cool design on either end. That would be really pretty. I could put a sentiment in the middle. I could run this through an embossing folder. So again, I really invite you to look at your stamp or your punches and look at them in a different way, because they're amazing, amazing tools. Back to this card though. I'm going to need 2 more of these in white. So while I have my paper out, I'm going to go ahead and just punch these out. And I love punches too, because they're nice and portable. When you travel, I bring them. They're super easy. The last thing that I'm going to do to finish off this card is I'm going to do my little front. And I wanted, again, to bring in a little bit of the flowers. So I'm going to put this back into my Stamparatus. And let me get these out of the way. I did stamp off on this. You can do whatever makes you happy, or you don't need to do this. It really is whatever makes you happy. Because I've used this grid paper and I know where the design is, I'm just going to randomly kind of set that down. Grab a magnet. I'm going to see how much ink I have on here still. And see if I need any more. It's not too bad, but I'll go ahead and I'll get it a little bit darker. And the way I'm going to stamp that off is I'm going to put a piece of paper over the top. So I've already got that place where I want it. And then I'll bring it back in. Oh, I like that. That looks good. So I will use this. And the last thing that I did on this is I took one of the punches that I had punched out, and I wanted to have a little bit of a border around the punch. You'll see a white border on the right and a white border on the left. So all I did is I cut one of these kind of in half. It really doesn't matter. I left the other one as it was. And I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on one side. And bring this punched piece out. And put that together. I'm trying to get the white to be kind of even as far as how much is showing on the left and how much is showing on the right. And get it nice and even top and bottom. And then I'll do the same thing. I just thought it would be kind of nice to have a little bit of a border around the shape, because I thought it would look a little bit. Let's bring that down. Now, you're probably wondering, why do I have this one? Well, part of this is going to be showing on the back side when I open up this card. You can see if you flip it over. And if I flip this over right now, you're going to see this mess. And it's a mess anyway, because it's not quite straight. Yeah. So the reason that I did this third one is I'm going to just glue this right on the back. And I just wanted that so that it would look a little bit neater. And it's just me, just because that was the design that I was putting together. So I'm just going to take that and glue that down, and I'll just make sure that my punch lines up. Sorry, taking that off camera just a little bit, just to make sure that I get it all lined up. And now when you flip it over, you don't see that mess. You don't see that horrible. right? And then what I will probably do, if I straighten this out just a tad, and rescue it before it dries. There we go. Okay. And then I am going to attach this to the front of the card. And this is where, again, you could use magnets if you want. And I'm just sort of centering it. I'm going to put glue on here. I am not going to put glue on the back of this, because if I get glue too far over, I'm going to glue it together. So I'm going to glue the front of the card, and I don't need a lot. And I don't need to be super precise on where I put it, because I know that my sentiment is going to cover that spot. And then I can kind of cheat because I've got a flat edge at the top. My sentiment punch is flat. I can try to get those to look sort of parallel, kind of, maybe. It's fairly okay. And then I'm going to open this up and just let that dry. Of course, it's moving around. I can close it. And again, I can just see from the bottom. And that is it. That is the card. It is really very quick to put together. And, at this point, the sky's the limit. If you want to add some bling, you definitely can. You could put anything you want on this, and it will stand, and it's super cute. A nice forgiving shape to go in the front would be a circle, because irrespective of what angle you have it open, it's going to always be upright. It's not going to ever be crooked. And the one thing about this card, I'm going to bring the other one back in because all the glue is dry, but essentially it's the same thing. When you put this into an envelope, I'm going to show you what it looks like from the outside. So my envelope is on the bottom, and when I put it in, I'm putting the points right at the edge, and then it will fit into my regular envelope. Now, I did play around with some sizes. I wanted to see if this would work for a slimline card. And don't laugh, this looks like a paper airplane. I know it looks like a paper airplane. But what I did on this one, and I think this was 6 by 8.5 or something like that. If you wanted to do the thirds, you would score it every 2 inches. And it will fit into an 8-10 envelope, but I'm not sure that it's super sturdy enough to stand up. And it really does look like a paper airplane. But you can definitely make these cards in different sizes. The larger you go with dimensions from this one that we've used, you're going to have to do some customized envelopes. This size that we made will fit into an HU envelope. But I invite you to try and experiment. Just make sure that when you cut, that whatever the length is, you can easily divide by 3, because that's where you're going to do your scores. So that's it, our double twist unfold card. And I know these two look pretty identical, because they are pretty identical, but this is something that you can use for anything. I was thinking this would be a really fun design for an invitation. You're invited on the outside, and then on the inside, all about what it is, if it's a bridal shower or a wedding or something like that. That would be really fun. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you try it, and please share what you make. And they are just super fun and super easy.